Welcome back to the Papa Meat channel. How you doing? How you doing? Come on in and sit on down because today we're talking about horror movies. But I can't simply do this alone. No, I have to bring in my good friend, Wendigo.
Woo, Wendigo. Whoa. No one who's ever watched anything Meat Canyon related has ever seen me before. Woo, yeah.
No.
So
The
special
newest
here.
member of this channel.
Yep.
We kind of do like a video once a year, it seems like, together on this channel.
Yep.
First, it was we did movie recommendations, and then we did the Ted the Caver, which led into Creepcast, which is, you know,
It's all right, I guess.
awesome. It's crazy
People
how
watch it, I
successful
suppose.
this show is. I've had a lot of people over the years hit me up again being like, when are you guys going to do another movie recommendation? It's been a while, and since this is October 1st, I figured we would do 31 days of horror films. So we're going to go back and forth until we give you 31 movie recommendations. Do October right and watch horror movies every day. That's the
Yep.
American way.
That's the whole point of it, the entire point. Also, if this was anyone else's channel, I'd come on here and be like, oh, thank you so much for having me. It means a lot or whatever. But since this is Hunter, I can
No,
say...
go ahead and do that.
No. I can say
go ahead.
that I'm held here against my will. He told me he would not send me
Okay.
this month's payment for Creepcast unless I came on the show.
I deprive him.
So
That's true.
I am here against my will, and I'll leave it at that.
So what I heard translated was that you were happy to be here and that, you know, thanks for having me. It was very sweet and nice.
Sure.
For over a generation. And that's about the way
It makes it delicious.
Wait! I want to thank our great, dear, beautiful, unbelievable friends at Bad Dragon. Bad Dragon is the home to all of your fantasy, toys. If you're trying to spice up things in the bedroom for yourself or maybe a partner, consider going over to Bad Dragon and seeing all of the amazing goodies they have to offer. Let me tell you, I've been to the facility. I've met the people that make it. It's like Willy Wonka's goddamn chocolate factory over there. Whimsy, mystique, quality, precision, royalty, class. Bad Dragon's products are not only just amazing, but the quality control that they do, the customer service that they have, and how fast that they get the products out with their shipping is pretty fucking awesome just from a consumer standpoint. And like I said, so many unbelievably talented artists come together to make these awesome designs, and maybe it's time for you to put a little something in your drawer or on your shelf, as I do, because they're art pieces, basically. They're amazing. Bad Dragon has been a continuous, long-time supporter of this channel, and I gotta tell you, man, they're our favorite. Sorry, every other brand. We love Bad Dragon the most. Okay? So if you want to spice things up in your own life, or maybe for a significant other, head over to Bad Dragon and tell them Papa Meat sent you. Thank you, Bad Dragon, for sponsoring the video. And hey, let's get back to the video.
I like to go about it in days or, you know, like themes. Have a day be a theme, have it be a little organized, right? So you're going to get a mixture of different genres, different kinds of, just different approaches to the horror movies, and to have them be fun, cohesive days. My first day, October 1st, what I will be watching today is Willard with Crispin Glover, which is a criminally underrated horror movie about a man who makes friends with rats. Psycho meets Mouse Hunt, or whatever that movie was from
Mouse
the
Hunt?
90s as well. It's with
Mouse
Nathan
Trap?
Lane. Their dad owns like a string factory, and they take over his house, and a mouse plagues them. It's a lot like Baby's Day Out. It's a mouse.
You are speaking gibberish to me. I have no idea. Hold on, mouse.
It's like if instead of being obsessed with his mom, which in Willard he is, it's a very weird, creepy relationship. He made friends with a mouse, and he basically uses them to get revenge in his life, and he has a really crazy relationship with this mouse that he names Socrates, and he battles against his other big rat. But it's really nice. It's a good movie. Every 30 years there's like a remake of something. So like in the 80s it was the remake of all the 50s movies like The Blob, The Fly, and then now we're getting all the remakes of the early 2000s where it was like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You had the Rob Zombie remakes. You had Willard, which was actually a 70s movie, but it's really fun movie, and I don't see it get talked about enough. But I love Crispin Glover. I love him so much, and I would say that is my day one recommend. Nice rat horror.
Nice rat horror. What a way to start off the season. You couldn't have picked a normal one, could you? No Exorcist or no anything like that. It had to be about a man and his rat. Are you trying to tell us something?
I think you gotta. I'm crying out. I'm reaching out. I'm grasping for someone to
I
help
see
me.
that. I can feel that.
Yeah, I like to start the month off, you know, nice. right? Because when I think of like Exorcist and these big movies, I really want to be really close to Halloween. Like I'm jittery with it. It's almost like drinking a cup of coffee on an empty stomach. I get all vibraty.
You need it to mean something. You need it to be special.
I think it just hits harder.
I get that. Yeah, you're closer to it. Like you got to ease into it. I understand.
Yeah. But Willard, loved the movie. Great performance. Also, R. Lee Ermey plays his like extremely dickhead boss. He plays the same role in every movie, but it's so good. Him and Willard's interactions are so like vile. It's such a great performance. I love both of them.
Fantastic. So we are now on to our day 2 recommendation, which for day 2 of October, we recommend another remake, this one of The Blob. The Blob has got to be, I have this like soft spot for monster flicks. Like I don't care how well the effects look or anything like that, just to see some kind of something kill people, it just makes my heart happy. There's this weird subgenre of horror films. It kind of popped up around the same time that stuff like grindhouse flicks were getting popular and stuff like that, you know, like real pulpy horror, called melt movies, which is, as described, movies where people melt. It's kind of like body horror, but instead of watching people get ripped apart and stuff, it's like watching people dissolve. And a lot of the terror kind of comes from when they stop being human, you know, when they're dead, when they're alive. But The Blob is very similar to that. It's probably the most famous example of that kind of movie, where it's literally the Blob, which is this like weird amoeba looking giant cell thing from space that just consumes everything in its path. And it goes from like small scale individual kills to taking over an entire town. And the gore is fun. The death is fun. It's just such a fun movie. It hits that right notch where the stuff you're watching on screen is still terrifying. Like, oh, I wouldn't want that to happen to me. But at the same time, it's so over the top, you can't help but feel kind of happy about it almost. It's hard to explain if you haven't seen it, but it's just such a great film.
Has a lot of elements of religious stuff as well. You kind of have this priest or this pastor who's kind of declaring this doomsday part of the town. Yeah. And it has one of the best endings where that guy is doing gospel in the middle of nowhere. Because you think he dies in the film, but then he still has a little shard of the Blob, and it's just such a great foreshadowing of like the terror still continues. And also it hits a really big part of me because I love child death, and there is a part where the child, you think it's all safe and good, and the movie goes that far.
I will say, like, it doesn't only kill the child, it like it decimates the child.
It is a bit of a decimation of a child, which is pretty fun. And also you get a lot of really interesting performances from Shawnee Smith, which he became famous again in the early 2000s for Saw.
If you're in the market for monster stuff, like, there's sure the original Blob's good too, but there's something about the remake that just like hits. Like, if you like 80s horror films, you'll love it. It's not as good as one of my favorite horror flicks of all time, The Thing, in my opinion. But if you like The Thing, there are similarities to how the monster's shot, how a lot of the stuff feels, especially like when characters are killed and things like that. It's just a really good film. You should really watch it.
Moving into day 3, I'm going to recommend, this is my Taiwanese day, and I'm going to recommend Incantation from 2022. This is just a nice found footage horror film. I think utilizes breaking of religious taboos in a really fun way. The way that it presents even like these incantations or these spells up on the screen is kind of like made me, when I first saw it, I was like, oh shit.
I remember there was that one scene, but when the girl goes to the mountaintop by herself, when they find her and she like kind of jumps at the camera, I remember that being one of the only recent jump scares to really get me.
I like it because it has one of those jump scares that feels earned. It isn't just like, oh, turn the music up as loud as you possibly can. It plays into, as we're going to see in this theme of movies I recommend, are religious elements, cultural religious elements, and especially like weird cult stuff. Like, I remember this one it's like a group of friends or relatives go up to a mountainous like kind of clan or village up there, and they kind of disrupt a ceremony that's happening, and it's all kind of focused around breaking this ceremony and the kind of the repercussions she has with visiting this horrifying statue. And I recommend Incantation for my day 3.
Incantation, I remember the ending, which not to spoil it, but that ending scene where they get to the cave. And just that, I remember being so tense that entire time. The way they do the like ancient religion's great. The way they do their monsters great. It really does do an angle of horror I appreciate that I think is very underdone so well. I can't recommend it enough. Incantation for sure. So for the 4th day of October, I'm going to recommend The Sadness. So we all know our zombie films. We all know, our movies about a large crowd of people becoming monstrous or whatever. But The Sadness does something unique with it. It makes it especially terrifying because it's like everyone becomes inflicted with the overwhelming need to be bad. That's either like sexual crimes or mutilation or murder. Like everyone is as evil as they could physically be at all times.
It seems like the biggest impulse, like their darkest desires. That impulse overrides their brains, almost putting them in a zombified like state of just like pure unfiltered carnage.
Yeah, like everyone is evil all the time. It's a really terrifying scenario because unlike like most zombie movies kind of fall into a place where it's like, okay, but yeah, I could outthink these things. Like even if they're fast, even if they run or whatever, I could get somewhere. But these are just really bad people effectively, right? So if you know how to work a door, they probably know how to work a door too. It creates this really hard escape route for our characters in the film. Look, if you're looking for something that is bloody and gory and over the top and in your face, this one will definitely hit all the marks for you. Imagine like basically just the next tier up of a classic zombie film. So yeah, The Sadness is such a fun, such a brutal film. If you like seeing stuff get really intense really fast, I highly recommend.
My buddy Rob Jabaz directed this film, totally inspired by the Crossed comic books. I mean, you could even classify it as non-zombie, but it's just like how horrifying everyone is, like the base level primitive nature of our brains, and like just like horrible thoughts people have, horrible desires people have, and how it's enacted in this film. It's a beautiful looking film. Like it has no reason to be this beautiful, and the practical effects are amazing. It's just there's this great sense of artistry and craftsmanship to the film.
I remember so distinctly, like all the infected wear these contacts that they look black initially, but when you look closer, it's these super deep red like irises. And I remember just being so freaked out by like how uncanny the contacts looked on these people. Like you may hear the description of like zombie film people are rage and kind of think like low budget horror, but it is a very high budget project, or at least it looks high budget, that pulls off, it executes on the idea very well. It elevates it to another level for sure, the level of production.
The Sadness, it's great. You should check it out. It's amazing. Moving on to day 5. It's my Japanese horror day. I have Audition. And I know that you said that you have never seen Audition. This is a must-watch Japanese horror film. Cannot recommend The Audition enough. From 1999. The best thing about this movie is all about a guy whose wife has passed away. He has a son, and he is kind of like, I'm ready to fall in love again. I mean, basically, it's a guy trying to find love. It's like a regular drama. He does this weird thing where he stages a fake audition service for a fake like TV role, and he's staging a fake audition for a part, but it's mostly for him to see if he can find a date, basically. And he stumbles across a resume, and he's like enamored by this girl named Asami. Halfway through the movie, it turns into this sadistic, surreal nightmare of like obsession. This is like up there with probably like one of my favorite Japanese horror films. There's so many good. Japan does a great job.
Man, that is high praise considering Japan.
I love this movie. I love the direction this movie takes, and the whole movie feels like a made-for-TV movie. It fits this kind of world that you're presented in. It's not that it feels cheap. It has like this atmosphere to it. It has like this kind of quality to it where it's not bad, but you're just like, why do I feel like this is like kind of a made-for-TV thing? And then it just out of nowhere beats the shit out of you with like surrealist nightmare kind of flavors. It's so fun. And also when I watched it again recently, like the actor who plays his partner in his business, who sets up this fake audition, he is the demon guy in The Wailing. This was just that time when Japanese horror was just blooming, and that's whenever you got all of these fucking American remakes that were pretty terrible, like The Grudge and The Ring.
What
and
happened
stuff,
is a bunch
Ringu
of like
and all this.
audiences too, I think they were seeking good horror and they weren't finding it in like Western films, so they started to like branch out, and that's when a lot of the stuff like The Audition started to get appreciated.
I feel like it had a cultural flourish, like kind of how Korean cinema is having now with a lot of people. There's just so much good shit that came out of this time, but to me, Audition, the performances are so captivating. Like you're so enamored by Asami and Shiguharu. These two people, the kind of relationship they have and the dynamic with his son is so compelling that when the movie does make that shift, the scene where he's like, well, yeah, I'll call you. Like they're going on a date, right? He's like, yeah, you know, I hope it's not too weird that we're meeting outside of work. And she's like, no, I'm like actually happy you called, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, you know, go get it, dude. Hell yeah. And then he's like, well, I'll call you. And then his buddy's like, well, you know, don't call her too quick. Give it some time. So then he's like kind of tussling because you can tell he really wants to ring her up. And then it cuts to her house and it is the most haunting, like you're like, oh shit. You're like, oh God. She's sitting by her phone and she's been sitting by her phone for days, not moving an inch. That's when the movie you're like, oh, I forgot I'm watching a horror film.
Yeah, it just immediately goes to like, yeah, there it is.
It's so good.
Got it.
Every time I get to that part in the movie, I just the biggest smile creeps across my face because I'm like, oh God, it's so good. So Audition, check it out if you haven't seen it. That's like, I think that's the thing that's really going to kick into the horrifying mood that you have. I didn't want to divulge too much. I could talk about that movie forever. That is my day 5 pick.
Nice, very nice. So from there, we're going to move into day 6 with another East Asian delight, and that is The Wailing. So The Wailing, I remember when I watched it, it was like hyped up for so long. And I'm like, okay, fine, I'll watch it. And then when I did, I was so happy because it feels like the kind of movie that, at least in mainstream horror, so many people have forgot how to make. You have like a child possession is like your kickoff for the story, right? Or at least it's some people think it's a possession. Others say it's some mental illness he's going through or something rather. And then it becomes like almost an odyssey to try to find out what's wrong with him. And they come across this man in the mountains they think may have something to do with it. And then it's like a mystery you're watching that's being unraveled as the plot goes on. The last 10 minutes are so well done between everything kind of falling apart at once. Some of that last scene at the house at night, like just the camera work was done so well to convey this tension that's happening and this panic and everything. It feels like an old school classic horror film transported in the modern age with, you know, what we can do with cameras, we can do with tech and stuff like that. It's like a breath of fresh air in the horror industry, and I really love it. It's a great film.
Yeah, I remember when I first saw it, I didn't really know what to expect. It was very new to kind of me diving down into Korean cinema. This was very compelling because it was like a mixture of different cultural, religious symbolism, worship or rituals jammed together to essentially say the same thing, which is just the whole movie feels like an act of faith. You are being led by this buffoon. Like the dad, the protagonist of this film is a dad who is a cheater. He is a guy who is like, he's sluggish. You can tell he's kind of an obnoxious guy who is a family. I mean, he does love his daughter, but he's kind of a up. And just coincidentally enough, he crosses paths with essentially the devil. And it is now a constant struggle of him trying to save his daughter from this possession that she falls under, you know? And this whole thing of like, it's a barrage of all of these different kind of weird, you know, there's like zombies. There's like, you keep unfolding this information of like superstitions of people feeling like this person is evil. No, it's this person. No, it's, I don't know which way I'm being pulled and torn. Not leaning on your selfish desires is a big thing, which is a huge part to this movie. It's a beautifully shot film. Also, Korea is just like an unbelievably beautiful, like rich green surrounding. So like it's beautiful to see, but also it has these multi-layers of raw human emotion, but then also terrifying spiritual, like philosophical like questions that are thrown at you in just a really approachable, fun way. But moving on, I gotta dip back into the remakes again, and I want to talk about Hills Have Eyes. It's just the classic remake from the late 70s, Hills Have Eyes. This movie me up when I was younger. I was so freaked out by the Hills Have Eyes that when I grew up like kind of in an isolated area, like farmland. And in this case, it's people basically parked out camping in the like desert. And then all of a sudden they are kidnapped by people who have been like a family who has been affected by nuclear radiation from bomb dropping, like the test of the nuclear bomb, which forewarning, there is an SA scene. All right. And I remember at the time it was so brutally, it made my stomach turn, and it's so weird watching it again today how tame it actually is. But then also people just continuously pushing that envelope, trying to go farther and farther with what we see. But this movie, I don't know, like I'm not gonna say that it's the best thing ever. I think for a Halloween, for getting out of your normal trope of like, you know, supernatural monsters and stuff, because I mean there are monsters, but they're like, I mean, just radioactive inbred mutants basically. primarily a large part of the second half of this movie, the horror is in the daytime. It's like the blinding heat of the desert and like going across these kind of like nuclear or fake towns that these people live in. Just super horrifying. I think that it's, like I said, not the best thing in the world, but I think it's a fun addition to this list that, once again, another remake. Some of these early 2000 ones, I think aesthetically, just how raw and gritty they were. That just was the early 2000s way. Hyper violence, grit, that Saw era of like people just want to torture porn, basically. I wouldn't say this is torture porn, but this does have a very visceral.
It's not torture
kind of
porn,
gross.
but it does really lean into the physical violence
sure.
of it a lot. Like the
definitely.
original Hills
Yeah.
Have Eyes is still like a classic to me, but I mean it doesn't live up to any modern standard of like violence or blood or effects or stuff like that. And you can definitely tell they were focused on that with the remake.
I think that those kind of stranded in the middle of nowhere movies are really fun, and I think Hills Have Eyes, it's a fun one.
Let's move in to the 8th day of October. So for the 8th day of October, I want to talk about a Cronenberg special, that one being The Fly. The Fly stars a personal favorite of mine, Jeff Goldblum.
I'm in hell.
I know. I'll leave that one for the Creepcast people. They know where I was going with that. But The Fly is a film starring Jeff Goldblum about a scientist who is developing teleportation technology and accidentally combines his DNA with that of a fly that makes its way into the test chamber with him. And from there, throughout the film, the fly is continuing to grow stronger. He is developing characteristics of super strength, of a morphed body. And like Cronenberg is known above all else for his body horror, and The Fly is one of the main reasons for that. But at the same time, what he doesn't get enough credit for is the character piece that the film is. About someone who's so dedicated to his craft, he's starting to lose his mind, he's starting to question if this is worth it, he's starting to push away people that are close to him, and he eventually culminates in this brutal ending that's both brutal for the characters as well as the violence we see. But yeah, it is terrifying from a body horror perspective, it's terrifying from a psychological perspective. I know stuff like The Fly's kind of become almost memed on nowadays by how well known it is, but there's a reason it became so popular in the first place. Couldn't recommend enough if you haven't seen it.
The Fly is easily the most accessible Cronenberg movie.
Yes.
If you've ever watched any other Cronenberg movie, they are a fucking fever dream of a narrative, of a plot. They're usually very abstract. Cronenberg got his start in the 70s, and he's like translated into the 80s. He got some more money with some of the success of his movies, but they're just odd, weird art pieces all about the horrors of the human body. Like, he likes to touch on these themes a lot, but The Fly is such a streamlined movie. There's not a wasted second, and Jeff Goldblum does such a great job, along with Gina Davis. Every great memorable horror film, in my opinion, is a simple meat and potato story of something that is like, it would have worked as a non-horror film, but then you throw something on top of it and it completely elevates it. A scientist who becomes obsessed with his work in this new relationship to be transformed. I mean, it's like basically a drama with a couple. It's a new couple. It's like a nerd, Jeff Goldblum, when you first see him. He's extremely nerdy, and he's just trying to get some pussy at the beginning of the movie. And he's just like, well, I can show you what I'm working on. And she's a journalist who's like, okay, fuck it, I'll chase the story. I mean, God, his transformation is so gross. It looks so good still today.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason Cronenberg is known for what he's known for. It's not hard to see. Everything still holds up about it. And yes, I do agree that this is the one that if you haven't seen a Cronenberg film, you can like show this to normal people and they'll be like, yeah, I enjoyed it, versus his other stuff where it's like, you just have to be ready for the weird.
Using October as an excuse to just watch classics is a great excuse.
Yeah,
like
I agree.
if there's any reasons to do stuff of like, I've never seen Creature from the Black Lagoon, I've never seen, any of these other staples where you've probably seen the poster or seen it mentioned, or you've seen the design a billion times, you've never taken a chance to, this is the time to. So if you've never seen The Fly, please do so. Moving on, I'm gonna do number 9. Day 9 of October is my A24 day. I think The Lighthouse is probably one of my favorite newer age movies, if not one of my favorite A24 movies. And I think my favorite director to come out of A24 is Robert Eggers. I think that he's a perfect hitter right now, with The Witch being probably one of the best folk horrors I've ever seen. Along with the Northman, him caveating out of horror and doing this like a mythological tale, like Viking lore that was just beautiful.
The Lighthouse is fascinating. A lot of people kind of do the whole like, oh, it's a myth retold, but like really, I absolutely love like taking the myth of Prometheus, right, and then putting it in the setting of this old lighthouse town, and it's so obscure, it's so abstract. It's like you're seeing almost like a dream of like the stuff that's happening on screen, but once you kind of get in the vibe of it, it works so well. I love The Lighthouse so much. The Lighthouse is one of my favorite movies in recent years. One of my first YouTube videos ever made, actually, back when I had like 1,000 subscribers, was me breaking down what I thought the movie was about.
No shit, that's
yeah,
cool.
Yeah, like that movie was incredibly inspiring to me early on.
You'll find with me, I like monologues. I like people. I love a great performance with just a very flavorful monologue, or like an actor who is just like oozing their character onto the screen. And Willem Dafoe, basically this poetry he's basically speaking in the movie is so well done, and the whole thing reads like a folk tale. You would tell this story to sailors moving forward about stuff, and there's even like rules in the movie about him, killing seabirds, and how you look up afterwards and see in sailors like the souls of lost sailors are supposed to be reincarnated, or they're supposed to be represented in seagulls and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
You even have moments of like sirens or mermaids in this, and the obsession. And I love also small character pieces. There's only 2 people in this whole fucking movie, and it's them stranded on an island.
William Dafoe's whole scream, he has, hark, Trident, hark, that whole speech is one of my favorite just character pieces of the last several years. I love it. I think about it all the time.
Stylistically, it's even in a square format, black and white. It has this grit. It really makes you feel like you're watching a movie from a time where they're supposed to be set from, because I want to say this is like early 1900s. I think we're like just got out of the 1800s into the 1900s, and you're kind of following a guy with a shady past that isn't totally given to you. And Willem Dafoe is kind of playing this old veteran sailor who is having to babysit this newcomer, and it's just the clashing of this is awesome. And also, as I know it's the meme, but very Lovecraftian.
Yes, it is
how
very
it goes about the
that
unknown.
one you're fully allowed to say with it, because I think that was the intention.
It is
of
a lot of iconography and symbolism with the light itself, and how they perceive this kind of like
the ending's so
this
great.
obsessive quality.
The going to the light and reaching for it, and like the cast back down the tower. It's so every time I see it, I get something else out of it. So yeah, I recommend it. Very much so. So now we're going to move on to day 10 of October, which for day 10 we've got a special one to suggest for you. That is Martyrs. If you're the kind of guy that likes to watch bad things happen to people, and a lot of really bad things happen to a lot of people, then Martyrs is right for you. It's been a while since I've seen it, but isn't it they get kidnapped at the beginning of the film? Is that correct?
First off, we need to clarify this is the French version. Do not watch the English version of Martyrs. It is a total waste.
Right.
It is a mind fuck of a movie. It's like all about this, like the movie starts off basically in a regular suburban house, and then someone comes in and murders a family. And you're kind of like, okay, this is another one of those movies you don't want to completely spoil. It's a movie where you think you know where you're going, and then it takes a right turn all of a sudden. And then it takes a left turn, and then it takes a right turn. I mean, this complete divulgence into a weird, rich society and this cult who are kind of this like high-class society who torment people for a certain gain. French hyperviolence is, without a doubt, probably the best. I don't think anyone does it much like the French.
I will give, like, it is a great film. It is very terrifying, especially if you're into body horror. I will say, though, be prepared. There is a reason that this movie shows up a lot on people's like most disturbing films of all times list. It is very graphic, but if you're okay with that kind of stuff, I think it's certainly worth it for what the film does with that graphic, because it's not just like violence for the sake of it. It actually like, ties into the plot, stuff like that. But yeah, Martyrs is a great film. It is very heavy, but I think it does something with that heaviness. So therefore I feel it's earned.
It's a very interesting take even on the martyr concept. It's funny when you hear the name Martyrs, you're like, oh, okay, you think of kind of other figures in time who have been labeled a martyr. It's another movie that touches on faith in a way, and it's just the exploitation, creating your own own martyr, like fabricating it. It's just gruesome, and it is, and I think that you're right to, warn people. I know some people they get kind of upset with certain themes in movies and stuff. And Martyrs, though, French extreme. You can't get as extreme as French. Your day 10, that's a bit of a heavy hitter. Day 11, though, I like to go into my guilty pleasure stage. Two of them, Stay Alive and Jason X.
I don't think I've ever heard of Stay Alive. I'm pretty
God,
sure.
Stay Alive is so good. Stars Frankie Muniz and like a bunch of other notable actors that you're like, oh, I remember seeing him in that movie. It's kind of that kind of film.
Malcolm in the middle.
Yeah, it has Malcolm in the middle. And the whole movie is about people who come across a game where if you die in the game, you die in real life.
Oh.
And who's the woman in history where she like would bathe in people's blood?
Bloody Mary.
Exactly. Well, yeah. How could I fucking forgotten that?
Yeah.
It's kind of like a video game take on that, and it's just like it has all of the normal tropes of people getting separated and people playing this game. So you have like really shitty early 2000s video game graphics that are like them running through. All right, I'm down in the tunnel or whatever, and they're playing the games, and it's so cheesy, but I cannot recommend it enough. It's so fun. It's one of those movies where it's like a perfect popcorn, hang out and like laugh and have a good time. It's not horrible either. Like it's an entertaining movie, and the performances are fun. There's a lot of great actors. Like you'll be surprised by the amount of people you're like, oh fuck, this guy's in it. And then Jason X is arguably one of my favorite Jason, like Friday the 13th movies. Jason X is so stupid. God, it's dumb. I mean, it's just literally Jason in space. It has one of the best kills though in it, where he puts the woman's head in dry ice and smashes her head. It's amazing. But you have people fighting Jason on a spaceship like he's a xenomorph. And then there's even a part where Jason flies into the Earth's atmosphere like a comet. This is a good day to have a couple drinks and watch some shitty horror films and just have a good time.
I'll add a guilty pleasure on there as where I mentioned earlier that I like just monster flicks of any kind. I've got to say 8-Legged Freaks. That's always been just like, I just want to have fun. Yeah. Watch people get into a fight with each other for no reason.
Giant spiders.
Yeah, like giant spiders. There's a scene where I think I talked about last time we talked about this stuff, but there's a scene where a spider is hitting a guy with its feelers, and it's making like the stock movie punching sound effect.
Yeah,
like that is so insane. And it's like people held up in a mall shooting spiders and stuff like that. It's fun. I love stuff like that. So yeah, I definitely understand the guilty pleasure thing.
It's a great palate cleanser, especially whenever you watch all these like serious movies back to back.
Oh yeah,
like it can fucking ruin your mood with some of these.
If you're weak, if you're a child, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
If you mean less.
But luckily, there's a lot of movies that are actually just fun, which I think all of these are fun, but in their own way. But this one is like legitimate. Like you have the lights on.
It's fun in the way normal
you're having some
people
drinks,
would say it's fun.
and yeah.
All right, so after that, we're going to move on to another horror classic, if you're strange like Hunter and I, and that is Day 12. We have From Beyond. If I recall right, is actually based off of a Lovecraft short story. So this time, Hunter, let that word fly as much as you want. Lovecraftian. Because it is truly Lovecraftian, because the story is about a group of scientists who develop a machine to see into greater realities or things beyond our understanding. And when they go tapping on the glass, something immediately taps back. It is such a fun movie. The effects of this are fantastic. From the body horror to the creatures that come out of the beyond. It's schlocky in some ways, but it also like delivers on this classic idea of like the things we can't see or the things in another dimension beyond our own. It does it in a physical sense. It does it in a fun sense. So if you're into body horror and just like cool practical effects from back in the 80s, highly recommend.
Yeah, From Beyond is probably my favorite Stuart Gordon movie. This is the classic Stuart Gordon, Brian Usna. It's just it's my favorite Stuart Gordon film. It's probably my favorite B horror film of all time. If I had to be honest with myself, just the beautiful pinks and purples of this mad scientist. You have Jeffrey Combs saying one of the cringiest, funniest lines of a horror film when he does. He ate her brain like a gingerbread man.
Bit off his head. Like a gingerbread man.
which is one of my favorite lines. And the whole idea too is it's like very sexual in nature. The whole thing is them touching onto their pineal glands, which is supposed to be the gland, I guess, that makes you horny. But it gets so horny that it literally jolts out of your head like a cock and like looks around and you get like weird, like, oh, which I love movies like this too, where it's like, it's beautiful, but the technology wasn't back then to make it look good. So it kind of just looks like a shitty VHS filter with like Predator heat vision thing. And he's like, it's beautiful. And then the only way that he can feed is he has to suck the brains out of people's eye sockets. So you just see, there's a great scene where Jeffrey Combs is just sucking this girl's brain out of her eye socket. It's fantastic. Once again, great stuff. If you're like a film nerd, I always get all giddy with this shit. Great miniatures, great puppets, and just a lot of
plus,
like really interesting.
Near the end of the movie, how like insane the effects level gets, right? Of all the different things people become and like the structures and all that. It's great. It's great to watch just for that alone. Like the props they built for it and everything.
The performance of Jeffrey Combs, like boss, who's like the main, like Dr. Edward Pretorius, who's just like this kind of weird, like eccentric scientist dude who's just like, I want my pineal gland to fucking explode. And he like gets zapped into another dimension, and he is like living in this hellish, like cosmic pit. And he keeps coming back to just be like, I want to have sex with everyone. But every time he comes back, he's more monstrous and he's just like goopy and wet. It's just, I love it so much. Easily my favorite Stuart Gordon film. I love that movie. Moving on to October 13th, almost halfway there. October 13th is another body horror day. I feel like I love body horror. What can I say? Probably the only Eli Roth movie I like, which is Cabin Fever.
That's the only one you like? You don't like Green Inferno?
No, I don't like Green Inferno.
This guy.
Green Inferno, I say no thank you to Green Inferno. Okay. But I do like Cabin Fever. This is another one of those, like, you can tell Eli Roth is just a huge horror fan. I don't think people realize too, back when Cabin Fever came out, this was like a huge debut for him. Like, he got very hyped up. He had Miramax behind him, like pushing him really hard. He was like good friends with like Quentin Tarantino. This was like the start to a crazy career, which, you know, he catapulted that into the success of Hostel, which, whatever you want to say about Hostel, that movie blew the up too. But Cabin Fever is just, it kind of, like I said, it's a love letter to other horror films of like, you have some like influences of Deliverance with the weird karate kid who's like, I like pancakes or whatever, and he does like the flips and shit. Very reminiscent of like the incest like redneck kid who's playing the banjo in Deliverance. The idea of just being trapped in a cabin with an infectious disease is just awesome. And I think that he really plays into the kind of comedy and the kind of like very campy aspect of, you know, all the characters, just like very eccentric, weird, tropey characters kind of stuck together. But then when it gets to the actual horror, it's just gruesome. Like, it's very gross. This is a super, super gross movie. There's a scene where a girl's in a bathtub and she's shaving her legs, and she basically just shaves off the skin of her legs with her razor. And it's just, oh God, the sound effects are disgusting. I was so, like, almost got sick. Like, their friend gets sick, so they're just like, I don't want to get sick, throw her outside. They just keep her in a shed outside on this disgusting mattress, and they're just like, you know, it's like a kind of like, oh, we're getting away for the weekend, and I hope I get to have sex with my girl. There's like a scene where she's like swimming there, it's like infected water, and she's swimming in the water, right? This girl that our main Boy Meets World actor guy likes this girl, and he's like, you know, I think I like you, and she like smiles at him, and she's like, don't be gay, and she swims away.
Yeah, that's right. Classic.
It's a lot of fun. I think Cabin Fever, like Once in a Blue Moon, is really fun, especially during the Halloween season. Hits that niche really, really well. I love it. And also, I had Raw for today as well, which is another Canadian director, much like Cronenberg. This director gets compared to Cronenberg a lot, but this is all about a movie of a girl who is a vegetarian, and then all of a sudden she tries meat for the first time at her veterinary school, becomes obsessed with eating human flesh.
Yep.
And it's just an amazing character piece of this girl, kind of like, it's like a college film, coming of age movie that is just all disguised as a cannibalist movie, cannibal movie, which is just a lot of fun. You get a lot of the tropes of like, oh, I think I like boys, but I want to eat off his fucking face. Oh, I love this director though. She's awesome. She also did the movie Titane. Love Titane if you want to see a girl f a car and get impregnated by a car. That's the movie to see. Very, very good.
What?
She does an amazing job with body horror. She's been compared a lot to Cronenberg, and I think rightfully so. She does amazing work.
After that, for day 14, I want to recommend an anthology because we all know I like my anthologies, and I think one of the best anthologies to come out for recent years for day 14, we have VHS 94. So the VHS series is honestly one of my favorite like still running horror series. Not all of them are perfect, but all of them are fun. Maybe with the exception of VHS 2. VHS 94 is my favorite. It has 4 shorts, and then it has the connector, you know, the bookend. But every single short is fantastic. Every one of them has something that I took away from it. Of course, it has Ratma. I believe the name of the episode was Storm Drain. But I mean, what hasn't been said about Ratma, right? One of the best original horror movie monsters to come out in recent years. The whole section's done well. It has a great ending. But then the others are fantastic as well. The Empty Wake is very underrated in my opinion. It is so subtle with how few characters it has. It's so well at the tension building of effectively a zombie in a coffin that slowly makes itself known. Such an inventive idea, and it does great. There's The Subject, which is insanely over the top because every VHS has some just like gas pedal to the floor in a crazy episode, and this one's about like someone who gets converted into a camera head monster. And then of course there's The Terror, which I think me and you have brought up like 3 or 4 times on Creepcast. Like a group of rednecks who try to use a vampire to bomb the ATF headquarters. Like
it's really it's so fun. The way that they utilize that, like, oh, when vampires in light, they explode. So they've been harvesting the blood of this vampire because vampires are immortal. They'll like regenerate, but they shoot this vampire in the head like every day, collect his blood, and yeah, they're just like this. They're gonna go blow up the ATF. It's just, I love that take on vampires. It's so fun.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's for one, the vampire looks great. It looks absolutely terrifying. The effects are well done, but just the way that information's fed to you too, because you don't know it's a vampire at the beginning. It's just you have this group of militia who just every day kill this vampire over and over, but you don't know he's a vampire. They're just executing this guy who keeps coming back to life, and it's not until you see them put the blood in a rabbit to watch the rabbit explode you actually know what's going on. It's just such a well done short. It's such an inventive idea, but yeah, everything in the series does well too. I even like the connection between all of them. The SWAT team breaking into like this cult that have like just taken all their own lives. Every short drips in aesthetic. It's one of the best anthologies I've seen come out in the past decade. Highly recommend VHS 94. But if some reason you don't want to go with that, another anthology I recommend is Trick or Treat, which to me, Trick or Treat, not maybe best quality wise, but tonally, I've always considered it the most Halloween movie ever made. 3 of like the past 5 Halloween parties I've been to, Trick or Treat is on the TV. Like, just like, yep, turn it on. That's the movie. That's the movie you turn on at a party. It's fun. It's cool. I remember going to a haunted house back in Tennessee, and at the line to walk in, they just had Trick or Treat playing on loop on the way. Because, yeah, it's like that's the kind of movie that you would play on the way into a haunted house. It just works between the vibe, the characters. It has a fun ending. Like, it's a great party film for sure. But yeah, VHS 94 is my anthology pick for October, so at least for the 14th.
I mean, VHS 94, the VHS series has become something where it's like, it's hit or miss at times for me, but I think it's still something that every year I look forward to seeing the new iteration. It's like just a great Halloween jam. But I think Trick or Treat, yeah, it's definitely up there with one of my favorite. The same way that like there's some movies where you're like, oh my God, this is just like the quintessential Christmas film, like Jingle All the Way or whatever. Trick or Treat is that for Halloween for me. I think it's just everything about that movie just fucking oozes beautiful October magic.
Yeah, it just works.
On day 15, we are at the halfway mark of the month, you're going to want to watch a Spanish film. The Spanish film I recommend is Rec, or Record, whatever you want to call it. I think Rec is up there with probably one of the best found footage films of all time. I think
I'm just gonna say it outright. In my opinion, Rec is the greatest found footage film ever made.
Oh, yep, really?
Definitively. There has not been a film, found footage, that has done so well what Rec sets out to do. The claustrophobia, the setting. I remember first time watching that movie, it did such a great job of setting up its environment that I was remembering as they were running up the staircases all the different doors they had to look out out for. And sure enough, that's where the threats came from. It remembers everything it does. It makes the horror so personal, you might as well be in the room with the people. It uses the found footage aspect to its benefit. And yeah, I haven't seen a found footage movie that does it better than Wreck, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think justifiably that's true. I think it's extremely effective. It's also extremely original. All about an outbreak that's happening in a basically an apartment complex in the middle of the night. We're following the found footage element comes from a person doing a report on firefighters, and it has a very organic way of like people because that's the kind of thing with found footage films is why are you still recording? That question can pop up in your head, and you have to have a way to answer that. To have some person kind of already be recording something and to kind of like, well, it's my job, it's already here, I'm just going to keep recording, I think is really interesting. But we get a lot of great characters that we get behind with these firefighters that have to intervene in this kind of outbreak. Another thing I love is when characters kind of start to turn on each other, right? You have people who are like, I don't fucking trust this person, I think they're sick. Very much The Thing, which I love. You know, one of my favorite Humphrey Bogart films, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, kind of does that too. I remember that cemented my love for this kind of deception with man and each other and kind of like looking after yourself. And Wreck does that perfectly. And also too, you get all these like beautiful little vignettes of entering people's apartments because you're like, they're checking on them. And you get all of these awesome, just brutally scary and attacks that happen only to have probably like one of the creepiest endings to a horror movie ever. And it's like just such a beautiful cherry on top at the end. Like I love the ending. It's so fun. And I think also for Spanish as well, I think I'd be doing a disservice without recommending When Evil Lurks, which is by Demian Rugna. That's like a pretty new movie too. It came out last year in 2023. And it's like a weird ghost movie. And this one follows a similar theme of like possession, and it's very odd. It's throws you forward, but man, it hooks you so quickly with the practical effects, with kind of like the viciousness of some of these scenes and the kind of like tumultuous family dynamics and the kind of drama that's going on with this family and how this guy is just trying to help his daughter. But yeah, Wreck is my Spanish one, and then also When Evil Lurks.
For day 16, we want to keep the found footage vibe going with one of the scariest found footage movies I have ever seen, the Poughkeepsie Tapes. So the Poughkeepsie Tapes effectively follow this long manhunt for an incredibly prolific serial killer who has an obsession with filming all of the murders and crimes he commits, from the stalking to the kidnapping to the torture to the murder. And this is all happening in Poughkeepsie, New York, hence the name of the film. The Poughkeepsie Tapes is a absolutely horrifying movie. Like, there's been a bunch of screenshots of it that'll even float online every now and then, and people will pass off that it is a true picture of a kidnapping in progress or that a serial killer got out. It's so believable a lot of the times because of how menacing the film is. There's a couple scenes that stick out to me. One is one where he kidnaps this woman. He has her in the back of a cop car and he's driving her away, and he's threatening her, and the threats are so terrifying and her reaction to it so visceral, it bothers me to this day. And then the ending of the film is awful. Like, it ends on the most depressing, sour note I think it possibly could, but it's fitting because the movie is sour throughout. It is a nightmare, and it really is about him developing an obsession with this one particular victim and her kind of mirroring Stockholm syndrome of him. It's just about that absolutely evil person, and there's no supernatural elements to the story or anything like that. It is just
I think this movie should have been so much bigger than what it was, or it's lived in so much infamy that's also what made it big. It was supposed to release in 2007 under MGM, but it was removed entirely. I don't know if that's from perception, because I know that was a big problem. Was I think a lot of people thought that a lot of this was real. There's so many, you've probably seen a snippet, but this never got an actual theatrical release. I think it was just on demand in 2009, and it wasn't until 2014 or 2017 or something did it actually get a physical release. So it's only ever been available on digital. So it's just it was such a pioneer, in my opinion, right before also Paranormal Activity. Found footage has always kind of been in this realm of being, it's capturing ghost stuff, right? Which is fun. I do love that. One of my favorite ones was Ghost Watch, and I think that's an extremely inventive way of bringing in that found footage vibe in such an organic way. But I think the Poughkeepsie Tapes is just just so evil. It's just such an evil, sadistic movie. Like there's even a part where he like gets out and you almost think he's going to kidnap this girl, but instead he just like punches her in the face and runs off and gets in his car and he's like laughing. It's like so petty and stupid, but it also just shows like, oh, he probably was going to take that girl.
Yeah.
Because you can hear her mom at the end yelling. The little vignettes of this movie and the kind of mystique they put around this like monster, this criminal, is something that's like, it feels very similar to like a Zodiac, the way that like people build this obsession around this guy, but it's just so masterfully. For an independent film, it's so good. I'm so curious to see the universe where this gets a theatrical release. You know, even like Paranormal Activity, that being made for next to nothing. Does that ghost movie, do they get inspired and make something else that's similar to this? I always think it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But I love Poughkeepsie Tapes. It's a beautiful one. Found footage is probably like if not my favorite, one of my favorite genres.
I mean,
so
if you do it well, it's so effective. If you play your cards right, it works so well.
It is the high risk, high reward.
Yeah.
Like there's so many bad found footage movies, so many, a sea, especially after Paranormal Activity, so many horrible ones. So when you find a good one, it hits so much harder, it's so much sweeter. And one that I don't think gets nearly enough praise or people don't talk about enough is Leslie Vernon Behind the Mask. And it's all about a fake documentary these people are making about a like serial killer, like from a movie, like a Jason Voorhees or a Nightmare on Elm Street, like kind of guy, where in this universe, those people are real. And this guy is trying to be as infamous as them, and it's getting to be with this person when he does all the kills and him setting up the kind of stereotypical tropes that you would find in a movie, and this film crew getting to know him. It's so good, it's so effective, very reminiscent of Man Bites Dog, which I also have on my list for today, which is them following a serial killer as well, and a film crew following it. Man Bites Dog is way less campy. Man Bites Dog is much more cold and a much more brutal watch. It's a French film. Those French they don't hold back, but Leslie Vernon is like, it's such a love letter to horror films, especially the slasher genre. The way you get bought into Leslie is so nice for the film to accumulate to his like kill at the end. You know, it's a really fun one. If you haven't seen it even yourself, Isaiah, you should check it out. It's a lot of fun.
I haven't seen it, but it's been recommended, so I'll check it out this month, I think. And then another one I really want to recommend that I skipped over a second ago but want to bring up is The Final Prayer. I believe The Final Prayer's its English title, I believe its British title is Borderlands. That's one of my favorite twist endings to a movie ever. You go into the movie thinking it's like a possession film or like some kind of exorcist demonic thing, and by the end of it, it is not that at all. And it is very cool. It is very Lovecraftian, if I dare say so myself.
Dude, I feel like Final Prayer might be like my favorite found footage movie. I have rewatched Final Prayer. God, I don't know. I reference it. I draw from it all the time. I fucking creatively love it. It's right up my alley too, with like the religious stuff and just I don't know. I love Final Prayer. If you haven't seen Final Prayer, you're doing yourself a disservice. You gotta see it.
All right. After that, we are on to day 18 of Halloween. We're going to keep the found footage vibe going with another classic recommendation, this one being The Tunnel. So The Tunnel is an Australian horror flick that, if I recall, the setup for it is there's a homeless population beneath the city that is going to be flooded. So a journalist decides to break into this underground tunnel system to try to make a piece about the homeless population of the city that lawmakers are not interested in the well-being of. And what begins is that quickly becomes that maybe it's not the homeless people they don't care about. Maybe it's they're trying to flood it really quickly because the tunnels are full of monsters.
Yeah, no shit.
Tunnel is very terrifying, and for one, just the setting of like underground tunnels beneath the city is always fun. It's the kind of thing that we see mimicked in found footage films like As Above, So Below, and things like that, right? Which is another classic to check out. But the tunnel involves these people being picked off one by one by these monsters down there. There's a lot of really fun stuff it does with the found footage principle. Like there's this one scene where someone sets down a camera, and then we see from that camera's perspective as something picks it up and moves it away. The creatures themselves are very terrifying. A lot of the violence in the film is very well done. It's just a great movie all around. Can't recommend it enough.
The Tunnel has this great moment where it kind of is it's like the starter pistol for the horror of the film, where they find this kind of, it's like a alarm, and immediately you see the sound guy, his like XLR cord whoosh, gets whipped out, and it's just them like running in a panic trying to find this guy. But it's so haunting. It's so crazy.
There's a couple more I want to recommend while we're still talking in the found footage genre is Lake Mungo. It's set up as a documentary about a husband and wife who lost their daughter in a drowning accident and are convinced that their daughter is trying to communicate with them from beyond the grave.
In my opinion, Lake Mungo is the best Australian horror film. It's so well acted. It's so well put together. Such a tragically bleak movie. It's just harrowing, but it's an interesting film about like a family trying to find closure in their wife and their daughter's absence. You know, Lake Mungo too was one of those movies where I got the DVD and the cover looked so terrible, and I think that was a huge deterrent to maybe like why it didn't get as many. I don't know. People don't really know about it as much, but Lake Mungo is awesome. It's not over the top either. I wouldn't even say it's a slow burn, but it takes its time getting to where it like wants to give you that like real horror at the end. Like, I mean, it like really takes its time. It's great.
But yeah, those are a couple of great ones to check out that you could substitute anywhere in here. But yeah, check out The Tunnel for sure. That's our day 18 recommendation.
On day 19, there will be a funny. It's the day of the funnies. I think it's a great day to watch Shaun of the Dead and Tucker and Dale versus Evil. Shaun of the Dead, I feel like it's probably that you don't need to talk about it. I don't need to talk about it too much, but I just think Shaun of the Dead, I watched it again for the first time in years. God, probably up there with like probably my favorite Edgar Wright movie. I love Shaun of the Dead. Edgar Wright as a director is just unbelievable, and him paired with Simon Pegg. I love that dynamic. It's so funny. The zombie stuff actually feels threatening. It's one of those movies where the comedy accents the horror. There's a lot of comedy, but there's also a lot of horror, and I think they play it in such a fun way, and it's just brilliant. I love that movie. And Tucker and Dale is just like a very schlocky, stupid movie. Once again, kind of a movie that's playing on horror tropes, but it does it in a great way where you really love Tucker and Dale. Like, I think that's like they're very charismatic characters, and if you haven't seen that one as well, it's really funny. Like, especially if you get annoyed with horror tropes, it's a great movie that kind of like points fun at horror tropes. So it's a great one.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, especially like there's a lot of violence and stuff, but it's all kind of played for laughs.
Sure.
Tucker and Dale's a ton of fun to check out. For day 20, we're going to be recommending a couple of series. Not a lot of series in here. We've all got our films, maybe our anthology films, but these are actually a couple of series. So I'll talk about one, and Hunter can talk about the other. I want to talk about The Twilight Zone. The Twilight Zone has a very special place in my heart because it was one of, if not the first, horror thing I ever came across. I remember being like 7 or 8 years old, and my dad would show me episodes because he would grow up with the series. They kind of relied on their twist a lot of the time, not all the time, but most of them, there'd be something revealed in the last couple minutes of an episode that changes everything. But some of them were just so well done that I never got tired of the convention. I remember the episode about the one everyone talks about, the one with the nuclear bombs going off. He drops his glasses, making him unable to read all the books he had amassed for years. Or the very first episode of the entire series is about a man who comes back from the moon to Earth, only to find the Earth's abandoned. And then at the very end of the episode, we find out that this never happened. He was just in a simulation and his mind broke down. They had so much fun with these little terrifying vignettes. I remember this one episode as a kid. I believe it was a woman who picked up a hitchhiker, and then you find out midway through the episode the hitchhiker's death, and she's afraid to drop him off, so she just keeps driving and driving across the country. Little stuff like that. So well done. It's understated horror that works so well. But yeah, I can't recommend it enough.
My favorite episode was always It's a Good Life. It's an episode about a child who has godlike powers, basically. And the whole thing is, people are like, but hello, Billy, how you doing? He's like, why'd you say it like that? Why are you being so weird? He's like, I'm not being weird, Billy. That's a beautiful coloring book. It's like a coloring of like a pig getting disemboweled. He's like, beautiful shading. Because if you upset the kid, he'll just make you fucking disappear, or he'll have you like meld with animals, or like all the kids in the town are gone because they're all afraid of him, and they're like, oh, he doesn't want to play with me, so he's killed every kid in town. Basically, they're just gone. No people.
It's like a malevolent god. Just
oh my god, yeah. But it's a 6-year-old kid or like an 8-year-old kid. It's fucking unbelievable. I like on these days too in October to just watch like 3 episodes of a series. And mine, I always like, and I do this a lot anyways, but Tales from the Crypt, I think, is probably my favorite horror series of all time. The amount of money they must have put into like making sets and like making these episodes is unreal. It feels like a beautiful evolution of Twilight Zone. Twilight Zone was very like stark and very like kind of serious. I mean, like all the time. Like Twilight Zone is like it's like a very dark show. Yeah. And it looks a little more comical now just because, I mean, the show was made like the 50s or 60s.
There was an episode where William Shatner was on a plane.
There's something on the plane.
Yeah, and was convinced that there was Bigfoot hanging on the wing of a plane. So not all of...
It's fucking horrifying.
Yeah.
It's horrifying though. He like looks out, he's like all sweaty and shit, and you like look outside the plane, you're like, oh my god! It's like a full-on thunderstorm, and this thing is just on the wing of a plane. It's fucking unbelievable. The guy's freaking out. Since the show is in black and white, it's so cold. Like the show is just so cold and evil and dark, and I think it still holds up today, and the acting is so good. I love watching Twilight Zone episodes because every performance is just like so fun. I love it. And Tales from the Crypt is a complete opposite. It's like cheesy, and there's a lot of bad actors on it. There's a lot of people who got their start, like Brad Pitt. I think that was his first acting role, but because it's so much more loose and like kind of comical, it goes over the top in so many great ways, whether it be a lumberjack episode about like a guy who owns a lumberjack company who gets a new wife, and she's trying to suck everybody's dick, and he's just like, stop looking at my wife, and he like beats a guy to death. My favorite episode is about two guys who are gambling against each other, and they keep raising the stakes. They play poker, but every time you lose a hand you have to cut off one of your fingers. It's so brutal, but there's so many episodes that are so well done, and even the ones that are like really bad and kind of cartoonish, it's just fun. Like it's just a great, really fun show. It's such a beautiful polar opposites of even your Crypt Keeper host is so over the top and cartoony versus like Rod Sterling, who's just like, why don't you picture a world where babies eat each other and then you have to put them in an ice box, and you're like, what the are you talking about, dude?
Oh
It's
yes,
like
a classic horror moment.
the classic
Something we've
Twilight
all feared,
Zone
if I
episode.
do say so myself.
Yeah, but it's great. I love it. On day 21 of October, I want to finish out this. This will be the last of the found footage, I believe, and I want to recommend The Bay, which I also think, no matter what, in October you gotta watch the Blair Witch Project. I don't care if people say that it's overhyped or anything. It's the OG. Dude, I know that there was some before, but nothing did it like Blair Witch. The only reason that found footage is even a thing now is because of Blair Witch. Pay respect to the elders, bitches. The Blair Witch, I think, in my opinion, is still the GOAT. But The Bay is an amazing found footage film. Once again, it kind of flips the trope, and also it's like weird. It's about like a biochemical kind of outbreak, but it's all from like, what is it, isopods?
I think
the little
so.
bug.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
It's the little bugs that eat fish's tongues.
Yeah.
But it's like, imagine those, but they're huge, and they contaminate the water of this town, and they start eating the residents from the inside out. And it's all these vignettes of like cop footage, news anchors, security cam footage of people surviving the day, and the whole movie is basically like people kind of talking about recounting that day in this like Rhode Island or Maine, East Coast town of this like port. And it's just really well done. It's very effective, and it's something so different than other found footage movies that it does feel like a fun palate cleanser. It isn't like paranormal. It is body horror in a way. It dips into that realm of like, oh fuck, this feels like it could happen. And it's a lot of fun. All right, we are into basically our last week of movies here, starting on day 22. What do you got?
For day 22, we are going to go with a classic, The Shining. The Shining, in my opinion, is the best Stephen King work, or I should say best Stephen King adaptation, which is funny considering he hated the adaptation for years because it does stray very far from the book. But Stanley Kubrick is a master of his craft, and there is a reason as to why, regardless of the ethics of his filming behaviors. It does create some incredible films. I will not say it's because of what he does, but regardless, good films come out of the guy, and The Shining is one of them. The Shining is one of the most effective creations of tension I've ever seen, from the way the movie starts to seeing the slow degradation of Jack throughout the film to where it ends up at the ending to the entire like last 30 minutes of the movie that become a chase effectively. It's just so well done. I love the mystique of The Shining. I know Stephen King wants everything to be explained for like 20 pages, but it just works so much better in my opinion when she's just running up the stairs and sees a dog man like laid down across a guy in a suit, or like the ending where you see Jack's picture on the picture that was taken back in the 20s. Like the Overlook Hotel is some ancient old being that has existed there for years incalculable, and we just see a short vignette of a couple of people who happen to come across it. It's so good. It's so good all around.
The use too of The Shining as like a power,
Yeah.
like of Jack Nicholson's son Danny having this power of The Shining, along with the man who also works at the Overlook Hotel, and they're kind of talking to each other, and there's just these weird elements of like telepathic powers or being able to speak with the dead, basically, which makes his ties with his dad like kind of fun. I mean, it's a ghost movie, and I don't think anyone has ever like, oh yeah, it's my favorite ghost movie. This is easily like the best ghost movie of all time. It's so crazy. Jack Nicholson's performance is fucking amazing. But once again, this is one of those movies where it's like, it's just an excuse to watch it again, man. It's like, I've seen it a billion times. Watch it 1,000,000,001. It's so good.
Yeah.
I wanted to shout out this movie called Eyes of My Mother. It's an American movie. This movie is so good. It's like a girl who lives out in this farmland, and one day a man shows up to her house, kills her mom, kills her family, and she's left there alone with him. She knocks him out, and then she just keeps him in her barn for the next 20 years, and like cuts out his tongue, does all this crazy stuff. I don't want to dive too much into it, but the movie is unreal, dude. And I was like, this is a fucking classic in the making for me. Like, such a beautifully shot movie. So elegant and like soft spoken. There's not a lot of dialogue. Hauntingly silent. I love it. So Eyes of My Mother, if you haven't seen it, check it out. On day 23, it is my crime day. It's a double mashup of Silence of the Lambs and Zodiac, which in my opinion are the best crime horror films ever made. I don't even know if you can count Zodiac as a horror film, but I just like watching it in October.
It feels the vibe. It's like, you know,
it has that kind of
like
deal.
A fall movie, if nothing else.
I get almost more horror out of Jake Gyllenhaal's obsession, this dark obsession with finding out who this guy is. It's a deep dive into madness. Like, I love that about Zodiac. It's easily my favorite David Fincher movie, but Silence of the Lambs it's one of the movies where so many people have taken from that movie, whether it be Seven or whether it be like even the Saw movies or like this kind of like mystery thriller. I think that Silence of the Lambs is such a masterpiece of a movie, especially Anthony Hopkins and Jodie Foster do great. But then it's just such an interesting concept of Jodie Foster going to Hannibal Lecter, not because he's even the main guy, he's just helping out with the case, to this other guy named Buffalo fucking Bill, who's kidnapped a woman and wants to wear her skin. It's a crazy movie, and it's once again, it's one of those movies like everybody's seen it, but it's the excuse to watch it again, because I tend to find that with these classics, you remember the general idea of it, but then when you sit down to watch it again, you're like, holy f, I forgot about all the awesome stuff in this movie. Like, you forget about the setup and really how it plays out. I love it.
Yep. Hard to go wrong with it for sure. So for October the 24th, I want to recommend a movie that is a personal favorite of mine, and that is The Ritual. The Ritual to me is so inspiring. There's actually a horror project I'm writing right now that The Ritual is my primary influence for. There's so much stuff that plays with the idea of, oh, well, we have this like the woods, or we have a cult or something like that, and we have someone just kind of like dip their toe into it. But there's few things that so well represent that carried out to its fullest than The Ritual. From the monster to the characters we have, all the characters are enjoyable, and watching them get picked off one by one, it hurts. The setup of the cult, when they come across the initial church and like the statues, it unravels the mystery so well. I remember that one shot where they're in like the skinny trees and they think they see something moving, but they think they could be just, it's in their heads. It's so well done. The Ritual is a classic. I love it both as a character piece and as a horror movie. And also, if you're in the mood for another kind of pagan horror flick, we've got The Wicker Man, the 1973 version. The 1973 one's a great mystery. This guy goes to an island in search of missing young girls, if I believe right. They may be held locally on the island, and then it quickly turns into a folk horror cult film. It's fantastic. Now, the remake with Nicolas Cage, you should also watch, but for entirely different reasons.
Yeah, you watch that one in the summertime.
Exactly.
Not anywhere near the spooky time because it's that bad.
Exactly, but you still watch it because Not the Bees is funny. But the 1973 Wicker Man is a great horror film. To me, I personally like The Ritual a bit more, but either is a very worthy pagan horror choice for your Halloween season.
I feel like I have such a love for this 1973 Wicker Man. The Ritual is, I mean, bar none within the last, I don't even know. I mean, it's one of the best monster designs ever. But even like you were saying, like some of the props, like the statue, it's like this descent into kind of madness that these people go through. They kind of like these lapse of time they don't remember. They're kind of going insane.
Yeah.
Is amazing. But then like the monsters but I think that the best thing it did was I love the way that it visualizes nightmares. Like some of the parts in this movie, they're all kind of plagued by their friend who had been murdered. And they are in the woods, but then they keep like replaying this in his head of this like Quick Mart that he got shot in, and it's like the way that they set up the Quick Mart in the forest is just so, I love it. It's so creepy, and it's such a great representation of like slipping into complete and total chaos in your mind, and like a nightmare come to life in your actual physical setting, and how this monster is kind of like plaguing your thoughts. I love the visuals of it. It's amazing. But 1973 Wicker Man, Christopher Lee, and just like, God, the the film, like the film grain look. It's just one of those, like, you get so bought in with the investigator who's also just getting so pissed because everyone is so fucking kooky. They're all just like, I don't know, you crazy son of a bitch. And he's like, what? He's like, I am a man of the law. Like, you have to respect me. And then for it to it has like just such a haunting ending of just so good. I mean, everyone knows the ending of him getting burned or whatever in the statue, but if you've never seen the 1973 version, because I know a lot of people too are like icked out by like, oh, it's so old. It's like, this movie's great.
Grow up. Become
grow up.
an adult. Shut up. I don't care. You're weak. Your lineage will be lost. The worms will forget about you.
Yeah, what he said. Moving on to day 25, because I like to watch Nightmare on Elm Street 2, which is, in my opinion, it's the best Nightmare on Elm Street. I love it. Nightmare on Elm Street 2, I like it more than Dream Warrior and all that bullshit. Give me Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2. It's Freddy. He's dipping into a little bit more comical. I mean, like by the third one,
you like it more than the first one?
Cowabunga, bitch. Yeah, I like it more than the first one. He's more realized in the second one.
Okay.
Also, I like the characters more, like the interesting dynamic of the guy, and like, I don't know. I know that Red Letter Media had this great video talking about it and how it feels like it's also it's a movie about like gay identity. It's like a queer movie, and it's funny to hear the writer talk about it because he's like, oh, I had no idea. I was just writing a movie. And the way people have translated it, Freddy is... He gets more comical. They give him more of that screen time, but he's still nefarious. He hasn't gone totally schlock, which don't get me wrong. I love schlocky, like, we'll see, bitch, whatever kind of, the kind of comical version we get of him. But it's just, I love Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2. And I also like Friday the 13th Part 2. That's my favorite one. For some reason, the Part 2s are my favorite because also Jason without the hockey mask, and it's just a fucking potato sack with one eye hole. So
yeah,
much
I
fun.
do agree that he looks
it.
terrifying in the second one, much more so than like later renditions.
It's fucking horrifying.
The mask is far
horrifying.
the potato sack is far scarier to me than the hockey mask. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, the hockey mask is iconic.
Sure,
I love it. But like crazy redneck in the woods, and you're just like, oh yeah, you remember how it was his mom? Yeah, no, that's actually him now, and he's actually just been like hiding in the mountains, and he's here to kill you.
Yeah, and it also sets up every Friday the 13th film that comes afterwards. Like,
they're all the same movies, but this one is definitely like just a rehash of the first movie. You kind of have a similar ending. We're not rewriting the wheel or anything here. I think it's just a fun one. I love Friday the 13th Part 2.
Yeah. Next, for October the 26th, we're closing in on the date itself now. We have another classic, Hellraiser. So like, there's all these horror movies that, as I was a kid, I remember being told, it's like, oh, it's the scariest movie ever. Things like The Exorcist, right? Or I remember a bunch of people told me The Poltergeist was one of the scariest movies ever. And Hellraiser was just kind of thrown in the mix with those. And then most of those didn't really live up to the hype. Like, don't get me wrong, I love The Exorcist, I love Poltergeist, but they're not that scary to me. Hellraiser was that scary to me. It is something about people being so obsessed with like physical pleasure, they're willing to like sell their souls in a sense to obtain it. And then you have the Cenobites, which are these horrific amalgamations of things that used to be people, but now we're so far removed from it. Hellraiser doesn't get called body horror enough, in my opinion. Most people kind of chalk it up as a supernatural horror more than anything else. But to me, the scariest part of the story is imagining the nightmare that had to happen for people to become these things. Our main character, who becomes the antagonist of the flick, he's like pieces of meat and flesh across stone. He has been completely eviscerated, and the idea of him still being alive through that is terrifying. And also there's that line near the end, the Jesus wept line, which still kind of creeps me out to this day. Like,
that's an improvised line too.
I did not know that. Really?
That's improvised. It's the greatest improvised line of all time.
I mean, it's
Jesus.
It's so freaky because
So
it's
good.
like he knows he has seconds left alive in this earth, and there's no remorse, there's no sadness. He just wants to be vile for what time he can, while the word vile still means something.
The Hellraiser movie too is kind of interesting because it gets such infamy with the the chains and people being ripped apart, and Pinhead and the Xenobites. They're barely in the film.
Pinhead may be a little bit more, but I'd say the others wouldn't exceed like 3 minutes of screen time.
Oh God, I mean, like, if that. But
Yeah.
it's so effective, and this whole movie is deception.
Yeah.
They make it seem like the main character is the daughter, but really, to me, the stepmom is the main character. She's being torn by her love of this brother, and she's had to settle down with the kind of plain Jane that she married, this guy who's kind of the family guy. Now he's like, by the way, I'm fucking back, and I need you to bring me people.
Yeah.
And he's just been like killing people and like sucking up their blood so his body can reform. And it's this this like insane deception and like this give and take of this like weird family drama. It's like this odd family drama of like a girl being like, I don't know which brother I want to be with, and it's just totally fucked up. One of the best horror movies, if not one of the most iconic horror movies of the 80s. Hellraiser, so good. To caveat that too, Dead Alive, Peter Jackson's cartoonish masterpiece. I'd like to include it on this day because Hellraiser is, the whole movie is very slow, and you have like a bloody guy, and he's like, oh, fucking feed me, whatever, and then it gets into, you know, it's crazy, gory nightmare realm. Dead Alive is just from beginning to end just so cartoonish and over the top. One of the goriest, funnest practical effect movies, and it's so funny to be like, this guy also went on to make Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, if I recall, Dead Alive for a while was the world record for most practical blood used in a film.
The parts of like this guy, this kind of sheepish guy, being able to kill all of these like dickhead zombies that have been, or like people that have been turned into zombies, the kind of creature his mom becomes. It's very, very cheesy. Like it's very like, at times in my opinion, borderline almost hard to watch with how cringe like the character is, and like some of the dialogue is very comical. It's such a fun movie. Like it's so fun building this character to the point where when it does get to the part where he kind of like, he takes care of himself, it feels so earned. It's a lot of fun. And also too, it's just Peter Jackson, just such young ambition, like just such a young director that just like explodes with creativity on the screen. On the 27th of October, we move back to anthology and I want to talk about my favorite anthology movie of all time, which is Creepshow. I love Creepshow. The brainchild of George Romero and Stephen King come together to make a bunch of fun horror shorts. George Romero does a nice little zombie film about a dad coming back to a life for his birthday cake, even though his family hates him. Comes back there. Stephen King plays himself as like a redneck who wants to sell an asteroid, but gets turned into a veggie man. But The Thing Under the Stairs is probably my favorite short of any anthology series of all time, of like a weird crate found under the stairs of a university. The monster is so scary. The acting is so good. The guy is just beaten down by his wife this whole time, and he devises a plan to feed her to the monster. It's so good. And then you have the crazy guy who's like a sanitary nut who has cockroaches come over, and it's just this gross insect. Man, it's just so effective. And it's also really leaning into these like freeze frame comic book moments that are blasted with saturated color. It's just, I mean, I don't think you just can't go wrong watching Creepshow. It's a classic for a reason. It's on the little tippity end of the list here.
So I will also mention, while we're talking about our final anthologies, I have to mention VHS 2. I talked about it before. For me, that's what made the VHS one of my favorite modern horror series. I always go up to people, I'm like, oh, what's your second favorite VHS short? Because I already know what the first one is. It's always Safe Haven. It just does its concept so well, executes so well, the effects are so great. And it's here in VHS 2, but I like the other shorts of VHS 2 as well. I like the one about the dog.
That's a fun one. That's a fun use of the found footage format. I really like when people find justify the found footage. Like I know I said like, why are you recording? But to make it something where it's like, oh, we're playing with our dog, and you put a camera on him, because I mean, people do that. You want to have like funny footage of your dog running around, so it's just from the perspective of the dog the whole time. It's pretty funny.
I also like the other one, Ride in the Park, the zombie that has a GoPro strapped to its head, so it like attacks a little kid's birthday party. Like, it's just fun. And like I said, Safe Haven's probably the best. It is the best in the series, in my opinion. So yeah, but like if you're looking for anthologies to sub out somewhere, just put on VHS 2 while we're through day. And the nice part about the VHS films, because they're anthology horrors, you can start anywhere. It's just its own vignette of horror. So start with 2, start with 94, start with wherever you'd like. So for October the 28th, we are moving very close to the date itself, so we have a very big classic, and that is The Exorcist 3. If you've seen the original Exorcist, which I imagine most of you had, or you're at least familiar with it, then you know it is a staple of horror, blah, 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 one of the classics of the genre. What you may not know is that the third one is, as some may say, equally as good, or at least equally as scary. The Exorcist 3 follows the investigator and one of the priests from the original film, obviously not the one who threw himself out of the window, but that goes without saying. It's more of a mystery, really, than a lot of other like possession horror flicks. It's kind of about this investigator trying to piece together this crime, and then deciding if, you know, if the devil has something to do with it, or if it's just a killer at large. But some of the scares in it work so well. It has this one very iconic moment of a nun walking across the hallway with the syringe, I believe.
The scissors, the giant scissors.
That's right, the giant scissors. Yeah, across the hallway.
Arguably the best jump scare of all time.
Several have coined it the best jump scare of all time. It works well too because the scare of that moment, the jump is in the camera rather than the scene. So the scene's able to do, breathe, do its own thing, but you still get that jump scare effect out of it. Yeah, The Exorcist 3 is a classic. If you haven't checked out or have only seen The Exorcist, recommended. You can skip 2, don't worry about 2, but just go to the 3rd one.
The first movie was directed by William Friedkin, who is like amazing director, one of the best of all time. He just died recently, very sad. The interesting thing about Exorcist 3 though was it was written as a book called Legion, a book by William Peter Blatty, but he also directed it, and it wasn't even supposed to be an Exorcist film. They were just like, yeah, I mean, we have to fucking sell this thing. It's the 3rd one, which is weird after the 2nd one flopped so hard. The first movie is so good about the desperation of a mom trying to take care of her kid, and it's something too where it's like the religion aspect is the absolute last resort. She does all these things of like going to scientists, does these tests, all these crazy things, and then finally she's just like, it, I have no other options. I'm going to call in the priesthood. And what's crazy about that movie, it's like that's like the very close to the end of the film. It's like just a haunting movie of a woman who's just like, I don't know what the fuck to do.
Yeah.
Like I'm so lost. And I think I like it so much just because it's another movie about faith. George C. Scott, who gives like such a great performance, just screaming the whole movie, angry as shit. And then he is met with his friend who he desperately, like, you're just like, has deep respect for, who is of the faith and stuff. And the weird thing is it's like a weird murder mystery. Like some of the events that are happening remind the investigator of a killer called the Gemini Killer, who is played by Brad Dourif.
Yep.
God,
a
I love
legend.
Brad Dourif.
Legend.
God, people, if you're not a horror fan, he's Wormtongue in Lord of the Rings as well, but he's also the voice of Chucky. Brad Dourif in this movie is so fucking evil. It's unbelievable. The way that he just like, he takes so long to say anything, like the way he just screeches out these words. Anyways, I'm harkening on it too much, but it's an amazing movie about faith and the dichotomy between the priesthood, the Gemini Killer, and the investigator. Like George C. Scott just goes through the fucking ringer in this movie, and it's awesome. If you've never seen this film, you gotta do it. It's
Especially
so
if you hate George C. Scott and want to see him suffer. Go.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you will see George C. Scott definitely suffer in this film. There you go.
So if that's what you're into.
The last 3 days, these are the ones where I'm like, I'm knee deep in it. I'm neck deep in it. And this day is It from the 90s, the TV movie, and Fright Night. I wasn't a big fan of the new It movies, I'll say it. I think it's just because I have such a love for the old ones where I was just like, why the do I need a new one? Tim Curry, you can't beat Tim Curry. The old TV special too, horrible. Like it's like really poorly acted,
Yeah,
but
of
it's
course.
so fun. I love it. The kid version, once again, way better than the adult version. But even still, the adult version still has this level of cheese and grit to it that's so fun. And also, I mean, dude, when I watched that when I was younger, I could barely fucking take a bath. I was so afraid of the drain in my bathroom that it freaked me out. I had horrible nightmares about it. Tim Curry is just so good, man. Such an iconic performance, and I feel creeped out by him and some of the scenes in this. It's just such an effective and also such a simple outfit.
Yeah.
But it's so good.
Also, the original It, to me, the concept is never that scary. I understand how if you're a kid, like Stranger Danger stuff, it's scary. And I think it is creepy for sure. But to me, it's never been that terrifying, the idea of like the It clown and stuff. To me, the film works better as almost like a Sandlot-esque horror movie, right? About like kids experiencing stuff, the time in their life, which for me is why I like the 90s better than the new one. I understand that the new one is objectively scarier, but to me, the scares were never the thing that was attractive about it. Still has that special tone.
Especially as a kid watching it, is so creepy. And also too, like the whole thing of it it's like a weird alien or like a like bug alien or something.
Yeah, that kind of
Whatever.
kills it a bit.
But it's just so much fun. And also to keep the momentum up on that, I think it should be required by law. In October, you have to watch Fright Night. I like Fright Night more than I like The Lost Boys. I think Fright Night is the most 80s aesthetic, especially like that time frame of teenage kid. No one listens to him, and there's a weird guy across the street. Meh. It's so good. Fright Night, I think by law should be required to watch.
Taking your high school girlfriend to the theaters back in like the 80s to see Fright Night had to be like a soulful experience. Could you imagine?
Oh my God. I can't. It must have been amazing. It was good eating in the 80s, dude.
was.
Taken for date nights at theaters. That was good eating.
For October the 30th, one day, this is All Hallows Eve, the day before the big one, right? We have a couple of classics that are kind of in their self parodies, or at least respective of of the entire genre. And we've got Scream and Cabin in the Woods. So Scream, I mean, we all know it. The class, there's two killers. The movie about there's a serial killer and they go through all the rules of horror movies, you know, never be alone, never hook up, stuff like that. And then the twist that there's two killers, and it's classic performances from all around. I think this was the first thing I ever saw Drew Barrymore in, and she's like, you know, a classic staple of 90s films and stuff like that. Scream is like the final boss, especially if you're doing this list and you watch all the horror movies. Scream is the final boss of like, oh yes, a horror movie that understands it's a horror movie and exactly what that implies. And it does such a fun job at it. So can't recommend Scream enough. And also Cabin in the Woods. Cabin in the Woods is to what Scream is about like slasher films. Cabin in the Woods is for like monster movies. So it's about a group of teens who are stuck in what initially appears to be a cabin in the woods that just has creepy stuff happening around it, only to find out it is effectively like the SCP organization that contains all of these supernatural threats and is performing these sacrifices to an old occult god. And the scene where all the monsters get out and start killing everyone, oh, it's so good. It's such a great scene. Cabin in the Woods is great. Scream's great. Highly recommend both if you love the horror genre, or even if you hate the horror genre. Picks fun at it, which if you do, I don't know why you're this far into the video, but still.
The idea of Scream is so fun too because it's Wes Craven who made Nightmare on Elm Street, and he was like a huge benefactor, but kind of was him critiquing the kind of genre that he helped create. So it's like just a fun thing of it's so oversaturated, but to have it reinvent it in that fun way, is just awesome. And then Cabin in the Woods is, I think, like it's such a love letter to horror films, and to see Chris Hemsworth die in a really funny way. It's just a great treat right before he becomes like the biggest actor. And then lastly, on Halloween Day, I always watch my two movies I always watch on Halloween Day is Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, and The Thing. I'm not going to talk about The Thing. I've talked about The Thing a million fucking times. Yes, it's my favorite movie of all time. There it is. I think Halloween 3, Season of the Witch is the epitome of Halloween movies. I think aesthetically it is perfect. It's like what Halloween should have been, which is just like an anthology film each time. John Carpenter came out with Halloween. They're like, that's awesome. And he's like, this would be an awesome trilogy, or like it'd be an awesome anthology of like every year we do a new Halloween thing. And then Michael Myers blew up and they're like, that, bring back the pale-faced bastard. So Halloween 3 Season of the Witch was like just this continuation of this idea of kind of like new story every year or every couple of years, and it's just I love it. The first time I saw it, I was disappointed because there was no Michael Myers, and then I kept watching it because it just fits that great like vintage mask vibe, the whole idea of like kids buying these masks and the kind of like commercialization of trick-or-treating.
Plus, I mean, it's such an interesting historic point, you know, because it's like, oh well, Halloween was going to be like once per year, almost anthology type, like a different spooky Halloween story every year. And then Michael Myers was in the first one, and that's not what the series became, because then the second one, they're like, okay, well, we'll finish up Michael Myers' story. And then they tried for one movie to make it its own thing with Season of the Witch, and they said absolutely not, and jumped back to Michael Myers, which it's funny. It's a weird historic point in filmmaking, but also just the fact that it is so Halloween-y. It's about jack-o'-lanterns around town, like killing people. Like you can, it's up there with Trick or Treat for me for being like the quintessential Halloween movie. So if you're gonna watch a movie, if you're gonna have a party, you're gonna have friends over, you're gonna watch something fun together, Season of the Witch is a great option. I'll also say the song that was made for the movie by Donovan is on my regular playlist I listen to every day.
It's amazing.
That's how good it is.
Holy shit, that's 31 films. So now you can't complain. You can't complain.
Now you have to shut up.
I don't know what to watch. Now you have to shut up and watch the movies. We even gave you the exact date. So today, start off the list with Willard, dude. Sit down tonight, watch Willard, and just let the things go. I'd love to hear you guys, you know, rejoice about the movies or even talk shit on them. Maybe you fucking hate them. I don't know. These are just recommendations. And Isaiah, or Wendy Gunesh, as I should say, thank you so much for coming and recommending some movies with me, my love.
Well, I had no other options.
That is true. He was forced at gunpoint.
If I wanted to get paid, I had to be here. But no, unironically, Hunter's a great friend. Always happy to be on the channel. Appreciate it, my guy. And thank you all so much for watching. And let us know what you think about these scary films, because they certainly mean a lot to us. So either, you know, agree with us in the comments or be mean and make Hunter cry. That's fine too.
Please be mean and make me cry. I love that. Enjoy your October, everyone. This is the best month of the year. Let's stay scared. And also check out Creepcast. It's a great show, I swear.
It's okay, I guess. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, you want a beer?
Or do you want to smoke some pot?
Or we can have premarital sex.